Welcome to the Rimworld mod rundown. We'll be taking a quick look at what you can expect to see from Build Door's plasma weapons. For starters, you'll need to own the additional workshop content, Build Door's framework, Vanilla Expanded framework, and Harmony. If you got your hands on Insectoids too and thought, man, I really miss that plasma weapon goodness, there are some options to help you get your fix. Build Door's plasma is one of those. Huge disclaimer at the top of this mod though, this thing is involved. You're going to be adding a new resource to manage, using buildings with their own mechanics, and if you're only ever used to vanilla combat, this might be a chance to dip your toe into ammo management mechanics, as these weapons are going to need refueling with the new Lysion resource, which I might be saying wrong. If I am, get used to it, it's going to be that way this entire video. Another disclaimer that this rundown does come with is a few localization quirks, so item descriptions or lower left panel values may sometimes appear a little bit strange. It's also possibly one of the worst offenders for having wildly inconsistent balance that I've covered in this series so far. You're going to need to use a fair amount of your own judgment when it comes to self-moderation, and maybe even hit a few bits with cherry picker, as there are some parts that serve essentially no purpose besides bloating the architect menu, and you'll never really use them. So let's try and be a bit more positive anyway. What are you getting with plasma weapons? Well, the clue's kind of in the name. You're getting pipe networks for air and Lysion, as well as supporting structures to make use of them. This Lysion can then be used to fuel all of your included weapons, turrets and utilities. You won't need to worry about any additional research projects when using this mod either, as everything is included in corresponding vanilla research, with this mod landing around industrial level for its production and spacer for its weaponized applications. Right, digging into how you're going to start using this mod then. You're going to need biofuel refining to unlock basically all of your Lysion production, which I know for some is going to be a bit overwhelming. Being thrown an entire production chain in one big lump, especially with some of the costs associated, is a bit much. Don't worry though, a couple of these bits can be safely ignored and the rest flow together very easily. We're going to be making use of 2 pipe networks with this production, so on the off chance you haven't used a pipe network before, they work very similarly to an electrical grid, minus the small black cable that can connect to buildings a few tiles away from the conduits. With a pipe network, you're going to have to build pipes directly up to the buildings that utilise them, which will be shown by the corresponding colours being visible underneath the building. Cyan for air and orange for Lysion. So first things first, what are we going to be ignoring? That's going to be the steam geyser intake and the primitive geyser Lysion collector. Why are we ignoring these things though? Well, despite the name and the writing around it, the steam geyser intake just collects air, which can be done for a lot cheaper using another structure, without stealing a geyser spot on your map, which is far better utilised for things like a geothermal. The primitive collector falls into the same logic. Not only does it collect a hilariously pitiful amount of the Lysion resource, you'll have better alternatives at your disposal. These 2 buildings can be safely ignored and removed with cherry picker if you hate clutter on your bars.
Don't like them? Then neither do I! Get the hell out of here! Ha! Ever see a guy say goodbye to a shoe?
Yes, once.
If we're not going to be using a geyser for air then, what do we build instead? It's a nice easy 1, 2, 3. First you're going to plop down an air inlet. These need 100 watts of power, cost 100 steel and 2 components. You'll notice when placing an air inlet that they have a marked footprint. This is the area around them that will need to be clear of obstructions for 100% efficiency. Similarly to how you want to keep your wind turbines away from trees, walls or large structures. It should really go without saying, but at times I do read workshop comments that surprise me and can prove otherwise, but these buildings will not perform if they are placed underneath a roof. You need this outdoors. Secondly, from that inlet we'll need somewhere to store the compressed air. That's what the little air buffer tank is for, costing just 140 steel. This is able to stockpile up to 2,500 units of air, and you're safe to place these directly beside the air inlet as they're small enough structures that they don't obstruct airflow. You might be surprised as to what does or doesn't count as an obstruction with these inlets, with things like crop or floor storage being the easiest solutions when utilising these spaces. The final step, if you need it anyway, is to link the inlet with the storage using pipes. Each pipe will cost 2 steel or 4 if you're going to build it underground. Just be aware that only psychopaths build pipes or conduits above ground.
You can't keep getting away with it!
That is your air setup complete. Very easy, right? But why do we need this compressed air? It's to allow the Lysion extractors to actually function. So now we're going to build a small Lysion extractor and make use of it. So let's get this hooked up, again in a relatively simple process. These extractors are nowhere near as cheap as the air inlet, with the Lysion taking 600 watts of power, 200 steel, 150 silver, 50 gold, 50 uranium, and 10 components. So it's here you might see that whilst you can build this collection at the stage of having just researched biofuel, it really isn't advisable to make this kind of an investment until you can actually make use of the plasma you're going to be accumulating. Now, just like we did with the air, we're going to make a tank. The small tank costs 25 steel, 25 silver, and 1 component, storing up to 400 Lysion. The larger tank takes 3x3 tiles, costing 300 silver, 300 steel, and 2 components, whilst holding up to 6,000, making it far more cost and space efficient than using multiple smaller storages. If you can afford to get the large storage to begin with, it is well worth it. So now we do the pipes. The Lysion pipes cost 1 silver and 1 steel for above ground, or 1 silver and 4 steel for underground, so you're getting screwed for having a nice clean base here, meaning ideally you don't want too much distance between your production and storage to keep the cost of this pipe network down. And with those pipes for the Lysion done, it's time to finally hook up the air to it. What you're going to see for the Lysion production is that a single air intake can easily support a small extractor by itself. Each intake can actually support 2.5 small extractors, so for the most satisfactory efficiency at this stage you want 2 intakes for 5 extractors. That is, for the small extractor of course. There is the option of using the larger one. This thing is massive. It takes 3x5 tiles worth of space, drinks 5,000 watts of power, and costs 1,000 steel, 150 gold, 150 hyperweave, 20 components, and 5 advanced components because fuck it, why not? This produces 10 Lysion at once, compared to the standard extractor's 1, and it'll be supported evenly by just 4 air intakes, the same it would take to manage 10 small extractors, which would be needed to match that production rate as well. So yeah, it does work out a lot cheaper to build this rather than 10 small versions. It still hurts to look at the cost of the thing though.
I am never going to financially recover from this.
This isn't all we unlocked at this level though, we've still got a few more toys in the box. First up is the Lysion popper. This works just like a fire foam popper, only it isn't as expensive to rearm. It costs the same amount as a standard popper, 75 steel and 1 component, and also drinks 50 units of Lysion to fuel itself when placed, with the upside then being it only costs a single component to rearm, as this breaks down after use instead of being completely destroyed, in turn saving you that 75 steel every pop. Ideal if you've got a highly volatile storage or grow especially flammable crops, whilst also making for a cheaper defensive option to protect your front line against things like the Imp Flame Bath. You'll also get access to Lysion coolers, with these having extremely vague controls. Each cooler costs 50 steel and 1 component, but draws absolutely no power, meaning these will continue to work through solar flares. This cooler goes from 0 to 10, with 10 being the coldest and 0 being off. The higher you set this cooler, the quicker it will go through your Lysion storage, with the 10 setting draining faster than even a large extractor can produce. It balances out around the setting of 5. So why is this cooler so damn hungry? Because it looks at the minimum achievable temperature and laughs. A Lysion cooler set to 5 will easily drop a room down to -70 and keep going. So it does come with a few cheeky applications, especially if you pair it with another part, the Lysion valve. This works like a standard power switch, just for Lysion pipes instead, but you can build it to have an emergency freezer toggle ready to go whenever there's a heatwave or a power outage, allowing you to use some of your stored Lysion to keep your food or bodies fresh. And if you've got a big stockpile that you want to make use of, you can even keep these coolers on standby in a prison or slave quarters, if you needed to quickly stop an uprising by applying a little bit of tactical hypothermia.
Hasta la vista, baby.
Now you've got something you can actually wear, the Lysion Tank Backpack. This is produced at the fabrication bench, costing 80 plasteel and 4 components, so not exactly something you're going to be rushing out to make for every colonist right away. Not only that, you'll get a lot more bang for your buck if you can make these at a higher quality, with better crafts increasing the storage capacity of the tank and also increasing the deflection stats of one of its abilities. So holding off until you've got inspired crafting or a production specialist really isn't a bad idea. At standard quality, this will have the capacity of 600 Lysion, meaning it'll drink 1.5 small tanks worth to completely fill. At legendary quality, this goes all the way up to 900. This backpack comes with 3 abilities, at the cost of slowing move speed by 0.32. The first ability is an active vent. This works like a mix of fire foam and a smoke pop pack, extinguishing any nearby fires whilst also providing a blinding smoke effect for just 50 Lysion per activation. The eruption jump is the second active ability, costing 26 to launch the wearer a very short distance with no cooldown, leaving behind that mix of fire foam and blinding smoke from the launch position, making it extremely beneficial for jumping out of an inferno. These effects, unlike the cryo spray from the upcoming extinguisher, do not trigger any frostbite damage, so you are safe to use them around friendlies without causing injuries. The final ability is a passive shield that can be toggled on or off, potentially protecting the wearer from heat damage, burns or heat stroke. The higher or lower quality of the pack determines how efficiently this ability is in terms of its Lysion drain, as well as if it fails to prevent damage, with legendary having 0 error chance but a normal backpack coming in around 20%. That isn't all this backpack's capable of doing, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. So how do we actually fill this backpack then? The final part in this menu is the large Lysion filling machine. This is essential if you want to make use of any plasma gear or utilities, as it refuels them. Again, it'll need to be hooked up to the Lysion pipe network, taking 150 watts of power and costing 200 steel and 5 components. So whilst you don't exactly want a building that costs this much, somewhere that it can be hit by stray bullets, you may still need it within easy reach for your ranged colonists, or on the way to defensive positions so you can make sure everyone is topped up and ready for a fight. This isn't technically all you get from biofuel refining though, as it has a few combined unlocks too. With complex furniture, you'll be getting the extinguisher shelf, dedicated storage for the liquid Lysion fire extinguisher. That unlocks from combined research with biofuel refining and gunsmithing. The shelf costs just 50 steel and 1 component, with it being able to automatically refuel any stored extinguishers if it's piped up to your Lysion storage. The extinguisher is technically a ranged weapon, but better suited for its utility, costing just 30 steel, 5 plasteel and 1 component to build, being made at a machining table. This has the capacity for up to 100 Lysion and consumes 10 per shot. Whilst it has a very busy info panel with all the relevant values, you're extremely unlikely to try and make use of this for its damage profile, or really worry around its accuracy percentages, but do bear in mind when using this to put out a fire, as other nearby colonists trying to stamp out any flames will experience some frostbite if they're hit by any of this cryogenic Lysion flying past their head. The next research in this list that will be getting you some fancy new toys is technically gun turrets, but that's also going to require pulse charge munitions, so we do foam turrets next, which includes the Lysion extinguisher turret. This is an automated firefighting turret, with pretty impressive range and an absolutely massive burst count, making it capable of easily drowning out any incoming blazes. Needing just 80 watts of power, 100 steel, 3 components and 140 chem fuel, this will drink a further 72 units of Lysion to completely refuel itself. The turret does still have the potential to harm friend or foe alike, causing nasty frostbite wounds with its cryo spray, but sadly you cannot force it to fire, nor does it automatically target enemies when they're within range. This turret exists solely to attack fire. You can force it to get involved in the action though by burning your enemies, which in turn splatters them with low damage, high pain burns and frostbite wounds in a very short amount of time. Just be aware of how expensive the salvos can be from this turret, given its extremely rapid firing cycle, and whilst this does apply frostbite injuries, it doesn't stack any hypothermia on targets. And that takes us up to pulse charge munitions, which is going to get you all the fun stuff. 5 turrets, 8 weapons and 1 repair item. We'll go through the turrets first, as they're all located together in a drop down menu in the security tab, so don't worry if you think they're missing. Your small option is going to demand 200 watts of power, taking 65 steel, 30 plasteel, 12 components, 1 advanced component and 15 jade to construct. so it isn't exactly a cheap defensive option by any means, and this thing is the entry level. As well as its power usage, it will also take 60 Lysion gas to fill its tank, with every shot it fires consuming 2. You need to bear in mind that even a handful of these turrets, each chewing through 6 gas per volley, can rapidly drain a stockpile if you're only using a few small tanks. It's why you wanted that lovely big storage right from the start. The Lysion weapons all do an interesting mix of damage, applying burns and shreds to the target, making them deceptively powerful, as a single volley from a turret like this might actually apply 6 wounds, if you get lucky with the hits anyway, as well as potentially immolating the target, applying further burns as they run around screaming. Numbers wise, this looks similar to a normal mini turret, and that's why I said it's deceptive. It has the same base accuracy, ranged cooldown and flat damage, with the Lysion turret having worse range, an extra round in its burst, higher armor penetration and stopping power, and also offering bonus damage to buildings, which is why this applies shred wounds. It's treated like explosive damage mixed with incendiary.
I said, hot shot.
Not only that, you'll also see that this turret, and by extension all plasma weapons, can be overloaded. This increases their damage and sometimes adds an AoE splash effect to their projectiles, at the cost of damaging the turret, or weapon, and consuming more Lysion with every shot. You'll want to be careful using this with your turrets given how expensive they are to build, as with enemies attacking them and them taking damage from every shot they fire, they rapidly fall into a dangerous range of fusing and then exploding. Equally, by using overcharged weapons, you're going to need to be building the expensive repair item, the replacement accelerator, which takes 25 plasteel, 3 components, 1 advanced component and 25 jade per application, with it only being capable of restoring a weapon up to a maximum of 75% condition. You can of course get around this by using another mod that features a repair mechanic, but that'll be making it extremely easy to use and abuse plasma weapons. Anyway, as well as the automated version, you also have the manned small turret too. If you watched the video on Ra's turrets recently, you already have a solid idea of how manned turrets work and why you would want to put a colonist on a manned turret rather than using their own ranged weapon, with the turret's accuracy values being used rather than the colonist's shooting skill. Unlike Ra's though, the balance here is very different. The manned turret doesn't offer anything different to an automated one in terms of anything besides power usage. Its damage, range, accuracy, cooldown, it's all the same. They cost around the same to build too. If you're at the point of being able to afford turrets like this, I'm sure you can justify them taking 200 watts of power rather than the manned version's 10. From there you have the larger turrets in heavy and dual varieties. These both cost the same at 325 steel, 140 plasteel, 20 components, 4 advanced components and 50 jade. It's at this point that you're probably aware that you're going to need a mod like Metals Trader to make any meaningful use of plasma weapons, because the cost is just astronomical with a vanilla approach towards resources. The dual turret leans towards damaging humanoid targets, whereas the heavy is built to bring down the biggest targets possible or large groups. Going with the dual blaster first, you're going to be getting that same split of plasma damage, hitting for 27 on a 5-round burst, with a more manageable 36 range. Each shot from this turret is going to be chewing through 5 Lysion, not to mention it requires 400 watts of power, so you need to consider what you're using your Lysion for, unless you've got an utterly insane setup producing it, as chances are you will not have the stockpile to support using both an automated line of defense and supplying your colonists with reloads if their weapons are using it. The heavy turret in comparison does a whopping 75 damage per shot, with a 2-round burst. This packs a stopping power of 10 and has a bit more of a stunted range, reaching just 29 tiles. Now, every single shot from this turret costs 50 Lysion, so it's draining 100 for a single burst, which makes sense when you see the AoE explosion that this thing does as standard, with it only becoming more ridiculous when overcharged. Needing just 100 watts more power than the dual blaster, I think the heavy turret easily wins between these two options, as whilst it does absolutely rinse through any of your stored plasma, it also uses it with a much greater efficiency, as the explosion from a single burst of this weapon can easily take down multiple targets, compared to the dual blaster that actually needs to land shots to get those kills. Finally for turrets, you've got the Class 4A Plasma Accelerator. Now, this thing. 2000 watts of power consumed, costs 900 plasteel, 50 components, 15 advanced components, 666 jade, cute, and 1 plasma core. Once constructed, this monster will proceed to chug 2000 Elysion gas, with that 2000 being consumed by a single shot. This turret also isn't automated either, you need to man it for it to be able to fire, with it dealing 800 damage, yes, 800, at 150% armor penetration over a range of 75, with the small caveat being that that range is deceptive, with the projectile landing and producing an expanding cone of destruction. This shot is obstructed by walls and mountains, so you're going to need a nice open line of fire towards your intended victims. Fairly safe to say pretty much everything outside of purposefully overpowered modded enemies is utterly vaporized by this weapon. It's the definition of an I win button. That leads us into the weapons then. You've got options for a pistol, SMG, shotgun, carbine, machine gun, sniper, cannon and plasma thrower. All of these weapons can be reloaded either from the refilling station or by wearing the backpack and using the new gizmo, allowing for resupplies in the field if you're going on a long expedition to destroy enemy bases or tackle a world quest. Anyway, to quickly go through these guns, because I'm sure you can read stat screens and we know how the damage profiles and overclock mechanics work by now. They all follow the same quality modifier that the backpack did, so a high quality plasma weapon is going to have greater tank capacity, and whilst the reload cost on the information page may state that it only takes say 50 to reload, it actually takes exactly as much as the tank can hold. If it has capacity for 200, it's going to take 200. Starting with the pistol. At this very basic level, it's rocking 7 damage per shot at a range of 21, with minimal armor penetration and somewhat acceptable accuracy. Whilst it does have a pretty solid cycle time and only consumes 1 ammo per shot, it feels woefully underpowered considering you're paying 20 steel, 30 plasteel, 2 components, 1 advanced component and 10 jade for it, especially given how much investment you're also going to need into plasma technology to have it actually work as well. But to be fair, it is just a pistol, so realistically this needs to be weak, otherwise it'd be total meme fuel if a plasma handgun was doing more damage than a charge rifle. From here we go up to the SMG, costing 45 steel, 25 plasteel, 4 components, 1 advanced component and 25 jade. It's actually not that much more expensive to make and dramatically ups the damage potential, dealing the same 7 damage over an ever so slightly shorter range, but on burst 3. This is going to offset the aiming and ranged cooldown time a little bit, giving it a longer rotation, and of course it will get through its tank a lot faster, as its capacity for shots is 150 as standard, compared to the pistol's 80, so less than double, whilst outputting 3 times the DACA. Then for another short range option, you've got the shotgun. This needs 50 steel, 25 plasteel, 2 components, 1 advanced component and 30 jade, making it surprisingly affordable. Strangely, this weapon isn't shown as having any kind of burst fire, despite it spewing 5 rounds when the trigger is pulled, with each pellet dealing 7 damage, this time in an extremely short range of just 11, with an even more reliable accuracy. This gets through its entire tank in just 20 shots, chomping down 5 per salvo, and, as standard anyway, only having the capacity for 100 fuel. So you either want to make sure these are crafted at a higher quality for the larger mag, or make sure any colonists using these are coming in strapped with a backpack for the extra rounds. Moving up to something with a bit more legs, we have the carbine. It's the class standard, costing 55 steel, 25 plasteel, 4 components, 1 advanced component and 30 jade. This does everything you'd expect from the jack of all trades weapon, dealing 12 damage on a burst of 3 over an equal range to a normal charge rifle, with this of course dealing its different damage profile, which is why it has lower base damage. The carbine will hold up to 200 Elysion at normal quality and consumes 6 per burst, so all in all, not that bad. These hold just about enough for a large scale skirmish, provided your shots aren't bouncing, but they are unlikely to hold out over a prolonged firefight off of your home tile, unless you're bringing an entire death squad wielding them. From there you've got the big guns. The machine gun is your heavy suppression weapon of choice, taking 80 steel, 40 plasteel, 5 components, 1 advanced component and 50 jade to build, with a whopping 500 capacity tank, and it needs it, with this firing on a 10 round burst for 12 damage per shot, making it more than capable of killing most targets in a single salvo. Its range is what's going to be holding you back from really going to town with it, reaching just 21 tiles. That's the same as the pistol. Of course, as you'd expect, this thing is going to chew through Lysion gas, taking 2 per shot, so 20 per full burst. But given its high tank capacity as standard, it does make it easily one of the most reliable weapons to use on the world map, and it comes with no move speed penalty either. You'll just need to get into the habit of rushing to get close cover so you aren't outranged by the enemy. In terms of range, you've got the Plasma Sniper. This needs 70 steel, 40 plasteel, 4 components, 2 advanced components and 30 jade, so it's about as expensive as the machine gun if you wiggle the cost a little bit. It uses 5 Lysion per shot and has a tank capacity of 100, putting it in exactly the same camp as the shotgun in terms of its longevity. Of course, this thing takes an age to aim and reload, so it'll feel like it lasts a lot longer at least. For a sniper rifle, this is hitting up to 36 tiles away for 27 damage, with enough stopping power to actually stagger most humanoid targets. To put that range into perspective though, this thing is being outdone by a bolt action rifle, so you're never truly going to have range superiority with plasma weaponry. It just doesn't work that way. Except when it does, of course, as you have the plasma cannon. It's a bit more of an extreme option at 125 steel, 45 plasteel, 5 components, 3 advanced components and 100 jade, and this monster uses 50 Lysion per shot, with a standard tank capable of holding enough for 2 rounds. This fires a 75 damage bolt that explodes in a 5x5 radius, with a little extra on the cardinals, stopping absolutely anything in its tracks over a range of 46. Its miss radius is pretty high, and it has a 5-second aiming time with a 3.25 cooldown, so you are left extremely exposed lining this shot up if it goes off course. But this is easily the most destructive weapon you can create and actually carry around with you, making it very easy to breach enemy bases or force them out of a defensive position by just blowing it to smithereens. Finally, that leaves the plasma thrower. Where to start with this? While the mod page does state that the backpack is required for it, I'm not seeing that rule currently being enforced, and it also has some wobbles, I guess you could say. I'm not sure if that it's not working as intended or if the features mentioned are purely for use in Combat Extended, as it's supposed to have a toggle between hot or cold, but it fires what appears to be a mix of the two. It costs 30 steel, 20 jade, 2 components and 1 advanced component, which makes it one of the cheapest of all plasma weapons to build. It stores 150 Lysion and belches for 10 each time you squeeze the trigger. Its extremely limited range of just 8 puts you in a very compromising position at times, whilst its 10 burst of 5 damage has the potential to hold down extremely specific corridor setups, which is especially effective against bugs. I've tried jiggling around the load order of the framework mods to see if there's a problem on my end, but it doesn't seem to address any of the oddities, including things like the missing text on certain gizmos, and like I said at the top of this mod, it has got quirks, with this being one of the worst offenders, as using this with dev mode turned on also shows red errors occurring every time it fires. And that, ending on a bit of a downer, is Bildor's plasma weapons. It's a mod that I love like 85 and 90% of, and just cut the rest out with Cherry Picker. Extremely late game focused due to some of its costing, it does actually make use of Jade for once, and it provides a little more depth to combat for a vanilla style player. For those of you out there using CE, this has a few different interactions when paired alongside it, such as being able to craft overcharged cells rather than overcharging the weapon directly, with there being a variable return rate on depleted cells for recharging. If you want something to burn out the buggos or just blow raiders limb from limb, give this a go. It's obviously geared quite hard towards late game tech, so you're going to need to get pretty far in a colony before you can really mess around with it, unless you get your hands on a rifle from a quest or a trader and build a turbo scuffed setup to keep it refueled. Then you can end up running that sheriff style colony where you've got a lone gunslinger who turns up with their mythical weapon in the hour of need and turns any and all threats into a red smear across the killbox floor. It's fun stuff. Thanks for watching, folks. If you have any mods you'd like to see a full breakdown for, or suggestions of mods you'd like to see covered, feel free to leave them in the comments, I might get around to them. I'll be back again soon with another Rimworld mod rundown. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening. Take care.